Okay, welcome one, welcome all to our special session right here. And at this point, I'm going to read a call for the special session letter. Honorable members of City Council, in accordance with Virginia Beach Code, Section 2.21, Virginia Code 15.2-1413, and the City's Continuity of Government Ordinance, adopted as September 15th of 2020, and Chapter 1289 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly as amended, and by the authority vested in me as mayor of the City of Virginia Beach, I hereby call for a special meeting by electronic communication means of the City of Virginia Beach on today, Tuesday, January 5th, 2021 at 3 p.m. The special meeting by electronic communication means will be held virtually with City Council members participating via video/audio conference. The purpose of this special meeting is to allow the City Council to hold regularly scheduled meeting regarding the items listed in the published agenda. If you wish to make comments during the hearing, please follow the two-step process below. Register for WebEx or register with the City Clerk's office, call in 757-385-4303 or via email at abarnes@vbdov.com prior to 5 o'clock on January 5th, 2021. The City Council meeting will be streamed live on vbgov.com and Facebook Live and will be recorded for rebroadcast on cable TV. Sincerely, Bobby Dyer. Okay, at this point, I'd like to recognize Ms. Chilius, Chief Deputy City Clerk, who will provide the meeting structure and instructions.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. This is Chief Deputy City Clerk Terry Chilius. Today's meeting is being conducted electronically and is allowed as described by Mayor Dyer during the reading of a call for special session. Also, please note this meeting is being recorded. To ensure this live event is successful, please note the following meeting instructions must be followed. Speakers, presenters, please mute any additional devices you have in the room to avoid any unnecessary background noise. It is important that once recognized, please wait 2 to 3 seconds to begin speaking to ensure council members hear your complete remarks. Please begin your comments by identifying yourself, and please do not ask, "Can you hear me?" as only one audio feed is open at a time to minimize echo and reverberation. And as such, you will be unable to hear my response to let you know that I can hear you. At the conclusion of each presentation, the mayor will open the floor for questions, comments. Council members will be recognized in the order in which they raise their virtual hand. It is important that council members hold their comments until recognized. Also, it is helpful for council members to ask all questions and end by stating you will stand by for answers. This helps to ensure all questions are answered before moving on to the next council member. Lastly, please lower your virtual hand at the conclusion of your remarks. Mayor and members of council, are there any questions about the process? Thank you. I turn the meeting over to Mayor Dyer now.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we will proceed to the city manager's briefings. Mr. Dehaney. Oh, do we do the roll call too? Okay.
Councilmember Abbott?
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci? Councilmember Henley?
Present.
Councilmember Jones? Councilmember Moss?
Present.
Councilmember Rouse?
Present.
Councilmember Tower?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Present.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Wood? Vice Mayor Wood,
Present.
Mayor Dyer.
Present.
Thank you, all present.
Okay, now we will proceed. Mr. Dehaney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at the request of several council members, Police Chief Newdigate will brief council on the detainment of Mr. Mackey at the Lynn Haven Mall on December 19, 2020. After the presentation, the chief will be available to answer the questions that council may have as it relates to this incident. At this time, Chief Newdigate will present to the council.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, City Manager Dehaney. Thank you for inviting me to provide you with an overview and have a conversation regarding the events that transpired on December 19th, 2020, as well as the subsequent investigation that was conducted. When I addressed this incident during the news conference on December the 22nd, I apologized to Mr. Mackey, and I want to reiterate that apology this afternoon. Just like the sergeant did immediately after the incident, he apologized and he acknowledged that Mr. Mackey had every right to be upset. Anyone who is misidentified would be upset, and that's certainly true for Mr. Mackey and his family. The video of this incident went viral, and people have formed conclusions based solely on that video, which is understandable. However, the conclusions drawn have not had the benefit of the full context of the incident, which we weren't able to provide until the investigation was complete. That investigation then took into consideration the totality of the circumstances and whether our officers' actions complied with the law and department policies. This afternoon, I will provide a summary of what the officers knew prior to detaining Mr. Mackey and what the laws and departmental policies are that govern our actions in these situations. And finally, I'll review steps that we plan to take as an organization to be proactive in attempting to reduce the likelihood that something like this doesn't happen again. When evaluating the legality of the stop, we must compare the conduct against the Fourth Amendment and what is objectively reasonable. The Fourth Amendment clearly states the rights of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable seizures, and seizures can either be defined as an investigative detention or an arrest. So we have two key points. Whether a search or seizure is consistent with law and policy revolves around the question, was it reasonable? And in evaluating the reasonableness of a particular search or seizure, it is imperative the facts be judged against an objective standard that is outlined in Terry versus Ohio. Next slide, please. So Terry versus Ohio is a 1968 Supreme Court decision that is the controlling case law for investigative detentions. According to Terry versus Ohio, there is no ready test for determining reasonableness other than by balancing the need to seize against the invasion which the seizure entails. So in justifying the particular intrusion, the officer has to be able to identify specific and articulable facts which, taken together with rational inferences, reasonably warrant that intrusion. So the question that we have to ask when evaluating each specific incident is, would a reasonable officer believe that the action taken was appropriate in light of the facts and circumstances known to the officer at the time? So when reflecting on the Fourth Amendment, we must remember that all seizures are governed by the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment also establishes the standard that actions have to be objectively reasonable, and there is no bright line test. Next slide, please. Because the Fourth Amendment considers all facts and circumstances, it is imperative to know all the information from this incident. We know that the victim had her purse stolen on December the 18th. We know among those items stolen were credit cards and the victim's permanent residence card, commonly referred to as a green card, which I've come to find out are extremely difficult and expensive to replace. We know that there was a stolen vehicle occurred during a separate offense on December 17th. However, that stolen vehicle was driven by the suspect who used the victim's credit card at the Miller Mart on December the 19th. We then know that there were continuing fraudulent uses of that credit card actively occurring at the mall, which was crowded with Christmas shoppers. We know that we had a detailed physical description of a suspect and a companion that were in close proximity of the various offenses. We know that there was an acquaintance of the victim that actually directed Sergeant Coffrin to Mr. Mackey. And we know that Mr. Mackey was detained for approximately 4 minutes and 11 seconds before being released. Next slide, please. So when we compare the stop to the relevant case law, we have to evaluate whether the stop was justified, and the incident has to be judged by the totality of the circumstances. And the legal threshold to conduct a Terry stop, one only needs reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. And it should be noted that it is a very low legal standard, merely more than just a hunch. Next slide, please. And what we have is the comparison photo of the individuals that were stopped in this incident. On the left, you have Mr. Mackey. On the right, you have the actual suspect in this incident. And I think what is incredibly important is to realize that the detailed physical description of the suspect and the companion in close proximity of these offenses, both of the same ethnicity, similar age, similar build, similar clothing, similar hairstyle, same location, and both were accompanied by a minor or companion wearing a red top. So both individuals matched the description provided by eyewitnesses and what was reviewed on surveillance video by other investigating officers. So when we evaluate the propriety of the stop and evaluating the totality of the circumstances based on the factors that were just presented and all the information known to Sergeant Coffrin at the time, we concluded that Sergeant Coffrin had reasonable suspicion to detain Mr. Mackey in this incident. Next slide, please. When evaluating the justification for the handcuffing, we have to refer to United States versus Crittenden, where it says that even brief deprivations do not convert an investigative detention into an arrest. And an officer may reasonably secure a suspect with handcuffs during an investigative detention if the officer reasonably anticipates the suspect may attempt to flee, and when reasonably necessary to protect officer safety during an investigation. It should also be noted that Virginia Beach police policy clearly follows existing law and that such actions do not automatically convert that transaction into an arrest. So the factors that we have to consider when we regard the handcuffing is there is no bright line rule. Each situation is fact specific. However, the courts have ruled that officers can handcuff for flight risk, public safety, and officer safety. So in this incident, we had theft of a car, theft of credit cards, theft of a green card, continued use of the stolen credit cards. And the sergeant indicated in his experience that individuals involved in so much criminal activity would flee, and he did not want to create a situation in the mall during the crowded holiday. So in regards to the handcuffing, the reasons that Sergeant Coffrin articulated using the handcuffs in this detention are the same justifications that the courts have ruled as reasonable, and therefore we found the use of handcuffs in this incident were consistent with law and procedure. Next slide, please. When evaluating the duration of the stop, we refer to United States versus Sharp, which clearly asserts that there is no rigid timeline for determining the reasonableness of a Terry stop. And two key points from Sharp that have to be considered is in assessing whether a detention was too long in duration to be justified, we have to consider it appropriate to examine whether the police diligently pursued a means of investigation likely to confirm or dispel their suspicions quickly. And the second point is that a court making this assessment has to consider whether the police are acting in a swiftly developing situation. And in such cases, the court should not indulge in unrealistic second guessing. So it should be noted that our policy specifically states that Terry stops should be in minutes and not hours. In this incident, the evidence indicates that Sergeant Coffin was diligently pursuing his investigation, and a detention of 4 minutes and 11 seconds was reasonable. You know, no one ever wants to have a situation of mistaken identity, and an apology to Mr. Mackey is definitely warranted in this incident. But when one assesses the totality of the circumstances, stop, the detention, and the handcuffing were all reasonable in accordance with the existing framework of law by which we are bound to assess such incidents. In regards to the mask, well, the stop, the detention, and the handcuffing were in policy. The failure to wear appropriate face coverings was not. And Sergeant Coffin and the assisting officer were both found out of compliance and will receive appropriate corrective action for the issue of the mask. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the other individual in this incident, Mr. Marky Smith, who was arrested at the same time within yards of Mr. Mackey in the same food court, he was charged with grand larceny of an automobile, credit card theft, 3 counts of credit card fraud, receiving stolen property. He also had both felony and misdemeanor open warrants. And of particular note, the victim's green card, which was of particular concern to both the victim and the responding officers, was recovered from inside the stolen vehicle that Mr. Smith was in possession of. Next slide, please. So what we have discussed so far is what the law allows and how our policy mirrors existing law. The concerns that I've heard from the community are not necessarily focused on whether the stop was legal, not necessarily on whether the handcuffing was legal, but whether, had this been 2 white suspects, would we have had the same outcome in this incident? Based on what I know about Sergeant Coffin and what I have found out in this incident, I believe it would have been. However, I am not naive, and I know that this is not always the case in policing. There is a history of bias-based policing that we cannot turn a blind eye to. And I think that's why we just cannot rest on our premises and say we were legally justified. And for that reason, I have implemented and looking to implement the next 5 action steps, which will, 1, consist of a request for a review by the investigation review panel. We want objectivity, and I think an IRP review of our investigation and our findings is appropriate in this incident, and that's why I've made that request to our Human Resources Director, that if it falls within the premise of the current establishment of the IRP, we welcome that outside review. There has also been an additional request for additional body-worn cameras to outfit the entire department. We know in this incident that the sergeant was not wearing a camera, and we intend to correct that. We also want to review our existing policies and procedures to see if someone out there is doing it better than we are to provide guidance and direction to our officers in these highly evolving, highly fluid, highly discretionary situations. We will also implement a refresh of our implicit bias training. It's been approximately 5 years since there's been a complete block of instruction for the department. So I think it is time that we bring that back. And then last and not least, there are opportunities for collaboration. We have and continue to invite Mr. Mackey to lend his voice and perspective to this conversation. And I think, you know, these are not the complete responses and answers that provide us with a definitive resolution to the societal issues that we are faced with, but hopefully they are the start of a continuing conversation, help bridge the gap between the PD and our minority communities. I submit to any questions.
Open for questions from the chief.
Mayor, we have Vice Mayor Wood.
Thank you, Chief. I had a couple of questions. First, it seems like you indicated in the memo that we just received just prior to the meeting that you have been unable to contact either Mr. Mackey or his attorney.
Mr. Mackey, be part of the conversation and help us determine the course of, looking at our implicit bias training. Mr. Mackey would bring a perspective to this incident that we could never replicate in a sterile training environment. And I think there is a ton of opportunity for us to have. The incident is what it is. We don't like the outcome. We don't like the trauma that was inflicted on Mr. Mackey, but I do believe there is an opportunity for us all to learn and for good to come out of it.
More questions?
To talk about the body camera issue as well. I noticed when I saw on the video the sergeant wasn't wearing a body camera. And Chief, if you wouldn't mind, wait a couple of seconds before you respond, because your whole first part of your response got cut off because they still had you muted. But the body camera issue, obviously if you talk about deploying more body cameras, that's gonna have a cost. But if the benefit of it, I think in this case probably would have been good. So if you can touch a little bit on the impact that a body camera, if Sergeant Coffrin had been wearing a body camera, what that impact would have been on the investigation. Would it have made it easier? Would it have changed it? And if you could just let me know and I'll stand by.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor. In regards to the body cameras, the process that has been budgeted, that the department has been rolling out for the past couple years, only outfits the line level patrol officers with body cams. It was never requested nor budgeted to provide them to supervisors, to provide them to detectives that do not normally work in a uniform setting. And I think we've seen from this incident that there would be value in outfitting the entire department. That is a memo that I immediately identified a need back in November. The memo has been submitted to the manager. There's also been a request in the department's FY 2022 budget. And I think what we see in this one is much of the incident was captured on cell phone video, but where we struggled is because we were bound to look at the totality of the circumstances. We had to know what specific information that the officer knew prior to approaching and detaining Mr. Mackey. We had to gain that information through interviews and other sources. Had we had body-worn camera video, I think it would have cut down on the amount of time that we needed to conduct the investigation, and we would have appeared to, in the community's eyes, as much more transparent and timely. So I think there definitely would be an inherent benefit in providing those additional cameras for our officers that are supervisors. We have officers that work in Detective Bureau or some of our other plainclothes assignments that may put on a blue uniform and go work an off-duty detail. There is always the possibility to be involved in a critical incident. And I think it's only fair that we give our men and women the tool that they need while they're out there policing in that capacity.
Ms. Wooten, if you'll pause 3 seconds and then go ahead and begin your comment. Ask your question. Did you have a comment?
Comment, Ms. Wooten?
Yes, I'm sorry. I saw Councilmember Rouse's hand up first. I didn't know if he was going to respond first. I'm happy to, but if he was before me, certainly don't want to go before he's ready to respond.
Okay, at this point, Ms. Wooten, if you can go ahead, and then we'll certainly, get Mr. Rouse right after.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councilmember Rouse. I appreciate that. I also want to say thank you to the chief for presenting today. I do know when I watched the video, it's very difficult, very painful to watch. And I can say that your swift ability to address the matter is greatly appreciated. I did watch the bits of the press conference that you gave and noted that you did apologize to Mr. Mackey. And I think you mentioned that you have reached out to him and to his attorney. I did hear some feedback that Mr. Mackey was saying that he did not receive an apology. So I did want to clarify that you did reach out to him after the press conference directly to apologize to him. Is that correct?
We have tried to reach him, council member, we have tried to reach him through uh, social media accounts of his associates. I have emailed directly to his legal representative. I know our internal affairs department has also emailed. I welcome the opportunity to apologize in person. If I had a way and a phone number, I would call him directly. I've just not been able to secure that information. So I think once again, let's take this opportunity to put it out to Mr. Mackey. Please come sit down with the police chief. Let me render an appropriate in-person apology for this incident. The offer stands.
I understood, and I thank you for that comment. Just two more pieces that I'd like to touch on, basically from the community very quickly. One is in regards to, of course talked about the body cameras, and citizens want to make sure and they want to know, once the department is equipped 100% with body cameras, will all senior staff be included to have to wear body cameras as well? So all senior staff, all uniformed officers, will that take place once the department is 100% fully equipped with body cameras?
Council member, the intent is to have body cameras available for all staff. There are positions that may be in uniform that are going to be primarily administrative, that there would not serve an immediate purpose to wear a body cam at that point in time. But where I would want the body cams for the senior staff is if we do have another critical incident and we mobilize, and those administrative officers are now dealing with protest demonstrations, there would absolutely be an expectation from myself on down that we would be equipped with body-worn cameras.
Thank you very much for that response. The other question I have, it relates to, as we were talking about masks being worn by officers. It's my understanding that subsequently Mr. Mackey tested positive for COVID-19, and citizens would like to know, Has the arresting officer tested, or has he tested for COVID-19? Is he in the process of doing so? They are concerned about that.
Council member, thank you for asking, and we have to be very cautious around that subject because we have been informed that it does fall under ADA accommodations and there are medical privacy issues in play. However, the sergeant has been tested. He has allowed us to speak about it. He was tested and he is negative. He wanted us to inform everybody that he has never felt symptoms. He does extend his condolences to Mr. Mackey and wishes him a quick and healthy recovery. But he also wants our community to know that, he regrets not having the mask on. I think, when we had the conversation, how many of us have gotten out of the car, walked up to a location that we're going, forgot our mask. Now you're a police officer, you're responding to a highly evolving situation. You're already at the location that you're at. There's a citizen request for service. You realize you forgot your mask. Should have had it on. He acknowledges he should have had it on, but he has been tested and he is negative, and he asked us to relay that information.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that and that information. The last question I would, and it's not a question, it's not for you, Chief, but it is just a comment. And the comment is, I see the next steps as it relates to a review by the IRP. And I probably would like to find out if the review will be will proceed with the current structure that we have in place. I would have a bit more confidence if the IRP was, restructured in the manner in which we have been discussing with council. I'd actually appreciate and would like to see the citizens review panel and more progress on that for specific issues like this. And I'd also have to relay to the citizens also state the same. We don't have an effective review board in place, and they don't have confidence in the IRP as it currently stands. And though it may deliver results, it won't deliver the results that citizens are looking for in terms of transparency and in terms of ensuring that there's oversight and investigation done in the way that the CRP, if properly implemented, would have. So those are just general comments on the IRP review. Thank you.
Councilmember Rouse, you can begin your comment.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to express my apologies to Mr. Mackey. Excuse me, my camera's a little off. To Mr. Mackey and his family, his wife, his teenage son, and his infant child. I hope that you all were able to salvage your holiday season and enjoy the presence of your family. So please get well soon. So secondly, Chief, I think, first of all, I want to express my gratitude to you as well, Chief Newdigate, because you only just arrived here in Virginia Beach. I don't think it hasn't even been 90 days since you've been here. And already we have an incident that has gone viral, put Virginia Beach again in the public eye nationally. And you were transparent, you were accountable, you opened an investigation right away, and here you are today with updates. But I would just go a step further. I think not only is the apology due to Mr. Mackey, but also to his teenage son and his wife as well, because that is a traumatizing experience to be misidentified. But what I think happened here is that this incident has illustrated the need to build a better race relations within our city. The conversation alone is tough, it's painful, and it can be uncomfortable. But I believe if we have those proactive conversations, then I'm hopeful incidents like this would be few and far in between. Because laws and programs are only part of the answer. We must find ways to reopen and deepen channels of communication between different communities. We must find a way to present dignity and respect to everybody, to every single American. So we have our work cut out for us. But I'm proud to have you here, Chief Newdigate, and the way you stood up there and represented our city to the nation, even though you've just been here less than 90 days. My question for you is, I have two questions. Number one, who identified Mr. Mackey as a suspect? And number two, who identified Mr. Marquis Smith as a suspect as well?
There was an individual, council member, there was an individual. It is in our completed internal investigation report, which I can discuss with you. I do not have his name immediately in front of me, that identified Mr. Mackey to our responding officers. And I think, what I will also say is during his internal investigation interview that he provided to us, he expressed remorse when he realized that there were two identical sets of individuals in the mall that day. And matter of fact, I think his quote was, "I felt horrible and my gut dropped," when he realized that initially he had misidentified an individual that was not involved. And then for Mr. Smith, that was a separate set of officers that were going off of the description that was obtained from witnesses, obtained from surveillance camera, and they made an independent stop of Mr. Smith because he fit the description, and it turned out to be the exact right person that was involved in this incident.
So the person who identified Mr. Mackey as a suspect, was he affiliated with Virginia Beach at all, law enforcement at all?
No, no, sir. My understanding is he was just a private citizen. He was not private security in any fashion. He was not off-duty law enforcement. I don't know that he's had previous law enforcement experience. He was an individual, from my understanding of the investigation, that was doing his best to try to help the victim recover the green card. And I think, that there was a stolen car, there was stolen credit cards, all this activity going on, but a lot of it really focused around trying to get the green card back for our citizen of Virginia Beach because of the troubles associated with trying to obtain a new one.
My last question is, so prior to this this individual identifying Mr. Mackey as a suspect, was there a conversation between the officer and Mr. Mackey before cuffs was placed on, or how did that break down?
No, sir, there was no conversation. The officer was relying on the information that he knew in this incident, the information that was relayed to him, and then the physical identification by this third party. At that time, he approached, put Mr. Mackey in handcuffs to further investigate the offenses.
And my last, I guess I said my last question ago. One more question. Was the suspect who ended up being arrested, Mr. Marquis Smith, was he handcuffed and escorted out of the mall as well?
No, sir, he was unhandcuffed when he walked out with the officers in this incident. Once outside, it's my understanding that he made some immediate incriminating statements, and then he was immediately placed in handcuffs.
All right, thank you.
Mayor, we don't have any other council members who want to make a comment?
Okay, at this point, thank you all. Chief Newdigate, everybody. This was an unfortunate situation, but this is a learning situation. And, going forward, I am confident that we're going to have some improved relations going forward. And, once again, as Mr. Rouse pointed out, it's essential that we take proactive steps to have better community engagement and build that confidence and bridge of trust going forward. And I think, one of the outcomes of this, through this adversity, we're going to find something positive that we can build on. And I would also like to apologize, on behalf of, I believe the council, if I may be allowed, to Mr. Mackey and his family. And once again, I would look forward to meeting him myself one day if possible. And as the chief indicated, bring Mr. Mackey to the table to help us take us, an unfortunate situation and help us make it better for the benefit of the city. So I thank you all. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Dehaney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, the Department of Emergency Medical Services, the Office of Emergency Management, they're going to provide you with an update on the Vaccinate Virginia Beach initiative.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, council members, and Mr. Duhaney. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak to you today. We're going to provide just a very shortened overview of the Vaccinate Virginia Beach initiative that we have instituted with the Virginia Beach Department of Health, and provide just some basic numbers on that, and then the request for funding that would be needed to move forward on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Brazel, who will talk about the initiative, and then I will come back to go through what costs we're anticipating as we move forward through this.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here to talk about a great opportunity for the city of Virginia Beach to combat COVID-19. The city has a long partnership working with the Department of Health, and for many years we worked on many projects together, most notably mass flu vaccination events. Just 2 months ago, EMS and the Health Department staff conducted a drive-through flu clinic at EMS Station number 8. And that experience laid the groundwork for where we are today. The Health Department has an expert team, and more importantly, they have access to the COVID-19 vaccine. The City of Virginia Beach has an array of resources, including a large workforce and facilities. It's our intent to mobilize the city's resources to underpin the Health Department's efforts to vaccinate our city's healthcare workers, our essential employees, and eventually the community at large. So when we say Vaccinate Virginia Beach, we mean exactly that. We want to assist the Health Department in spreading the vaccine as far as possible to our citizens. We've assembled an incident management team, which right now consists of staff from EMS, Fire, Office of Emergency Management, and Health, but we're going to expect to branch out to other experts within the city to help bring in all of these resources together. We hope to move this to an all-in effort, much like we've done other major incidents that have affected our city. So if we go to the next slide, please. This presentation isn't about a vaccination supply process or the tactics. That's really purview of the Health Department, but I can make it simple that as the Health Department receives supplies and identifies recipient groups, the city's incident response team is going to mobilize, and we are going to sponsor the locations for the vaccinations. We've already started with this. Last week we did 249 folks over at EMS Station 8. These were mainly the vaccination team from the Health Department, as well as some EMS and fire members. And then today and Thursday, we're running clinics as well at Station 8. We anticipate vaccinating about 500 people today, and 400 to 500 on Thursday is our goal. The target audiences, it's more EMS and fire folks, but also healthcare workers from out in the community. Okay, so to be clear, this is not about vaccinating city employees. This is about assisting the Health Department getting that 1A group of healthcare workers taken care of. Once we get them done with leveraging our city assets, we hope to move to further essential workers, which will include obviously police officers and other key players that we'll be working with the health department to identify. This is an unusual approach. We're often siloed between governmental agencies or in the medical field, but we believe that by bringing all the city assets together in an all-in approach, we can help control our destiny and more rapidly get this done. So next slide, please. Sorry. This really just is for example purposes. We are going to work through phases that the city workforce and the general population, it's going to run simultaneous. Again, we're today doing our fire and EMS, but we're also doing citizens that work in the healthcare field. But as we take care of one group, the health department will open up the next group and the next group, and we'll keep providing the big spots. So that's where we're at today, and I'll pass this back to Kim. OEM had done a lot of the foundational work to get this started and did some money estimates. So I'm going to give this back to Kim for that.
Thank you, Chief. One of the things that we're here to talk about today, and we had spoken to Mr. Duhaney shortly before Christmas, was in our efforts to vaccinate these estimated 175,000 folks with the 350,000 doses, we've got a lot of events that we're going to need to do. The points of distribution, both the closed and the larger public distributions. And it is going to require quite a bit of staff time and resources, as well as some potential costs up front for the procuring of both locations, possible cleaning staff, and things like that, and then operational costs that may come along with the vaccine, such as additional medical supplies. While we fully anticipate some version of the CARES Act coming back around with some recoup of these costs, we are looking at having to front a lot of these costs, and in our initial estimates, the bulk of it has come from overtime costs that will be necessary for these vaccinators and those running the pods. So we have put together just an estimate of what we would like to see as an appropriation to get us started, fully anticipating that either the CARES Act rebooted or another form of federal or state funding will start to supplement this. But of course, we can't wait for that to happen. We've gotten very much out ahead of this, more so than some of our other neighboring localities, and we'd like to keep the momentum going. But, for that, we do need to allocate some funding for it so that we can purchase what is needed and procure what is needed to keep moving forward. And next slide. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. So we will stand by for questions.
Any questions from any council member?
Council members, I just want to say I have Mr. Moss, Mr. Tower, Mr. Wood, and Ms. Wilson, and I'll call you in that order. If you could please ask all your questions at first, and then that will allow them to answer all your questions at the same time, just for ease of communication and going back and forth. So, Mr. Moss, if you'll please start, pause 3 seconds, and then start with your question or your comment. Thank you.
My first question is, how much of the beach population is being addressed directly by the state, meaning referring to nursing homes and nursing home workers? So I'd like to understand, given the state's protocol and their allocation and the people they're directly serving, what portion of our population is being served by that mechanism. I noticed a number of localities, specifically Connecticut is one state, they're heavily relying upon pharmacies as points of immunization of the vaccine to give them more points. I'm just curious, are we not looking, is the state not looking at more dispersed locations to getting people? At 500 people a day, that's 900 days to do 450,000 people. So that's 175. So I'm curious about other delivery mechanisms. Also, I'd like to know, I know you said this is independent of supply, but without the vaccine, there is no immunization. So in fact, we do need to have some kind of a mechanism that's addressed relative to the volume of vaccines we think we will receive based on the state's federal allocation and our local share of that. I'm sure many of us who are of my age can recall when we all went to elementary schools and got the polio vaccine on a sugar cube. People all lined up. We didn't have an internet, we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have all this overhead. So I'm just curious as to why this delivery mechanism and not a more decentralized, more access, more places, and is this prescribed by the state that we have done it this way, or do we have the flexibility to engage our private sector partners to increase the places of delivery? So, not that I don't think we can't be a partner, but 175,000 people against 450 is, does that get us to the critical mass? Is that herd immunity? Where are we at? I just have a lot of questions, but a lot does deal with the supply. You know, what do we anticipate giving any indications from CDC, because all those allotments are made by the federal government? What do we anticipate? 175,000 times 2, because getting 2 doses, is this a 2-dose? Are we doing only half of 175 because those people are getting 2 doses? So that's just a start. I'm just trying to understand, in the end, maximizing the number of people that we can get vaccinated as quickly as possible when it becomes available. And are we really pursuing the right distribution and maximizing the places that are competent to administer vaccines, much as we do with the flu shot? That's my questions. Thank you.
This really, that most of those answers will need to come from the health department at a state level, but I can cover some of this. What you're absolutely right. 500 a day is not going to be the volume, and we're working with them to ramp that up as supplies continue to come in. There's a multi-pronged approach with Pfizer. The Pfizer, the one requires the really deep freeze vaccine, went to the hospitals to reach into the healthcare community via that network. There's the pharmacies are engaged at the nursing homes and long-term care facilities. And then the Moderna is what the health department received, that they're tasked with getting out in the community. And that's where we've offered to help partner with them. We're at the beginning. We know there's a lot more work to be done. We're just trying to expedite with help facilitate that. The number 175,000, again, the herd immunity, there's experts need to get involved in that. We've been kind of seeing a 50 to 60% interest rate in whether people want to receive the vaccine. So those are just some preliminary numbers. The health department could give you much better detail on the actual mechanics of how we're getting this stuff from the federal government.
Did you have any more comments or questions?
I do a follow-up. Yeah, well, I hope, Mr. Dehaney, that someone from the health department can get us smart on that, because I think that in the end, if we're talking about vaccinating our community, and also it's the state and the people, other states who have visitors who come here, that getting as quickly as possible with the volume that's available out into our public, those who want to voluntarily take it and whatever employers do, is important. So I would like to have someone from the state answer some of those questions, because I think those are questions that I hear from business people. Is like, I heard today on, I forget what news program, that the state has 450,000 vaccines that are waiting to be distributed. Is that true or it's not? So I think what's missing, Mr. Dehaney, from the state, and maybe we need some kind of annual message, a daily message from you or weekly message from you, is what is our status? Because I think the lack of knowledge in the public is causing its own sense of concerns, as we're seeing as the volume of emails that council members are getting about just the vaccination of city employees. So even if we can tell them we don't know, or even if we can tell them that we have to wait to hear from the state, but I think anything we can do to clarify the picture of what our status is and where we hope to go with the public is an improvement. And I think the state needs to return to providing some kind of daily, at least notification to localities. You know, it's amazing. You can order something from Amazon and track it every single day, but we can't seem to understand or communicate effectively how many vaccines we've received, where they've been distributed in the state, where they're holding. It seems logistics has been not well executed. I'm not blaming anyone, but it's leaving the public and even us in the dark as to what do we expect, what can the public expect? And I think that lack of information, and I have to say poor execution, is needs to be fixed. And I don't know how that gets fixed. Like I said, we distributed polio vaccine, and I'm sure all of us without all this technology, and that was a serious disease. And I would like to think logistically we could figure out how to help them solve that issue. Thank you. That's just a commentary.
Thank you, Mr. Tower. Mr. Moss. Mr. Tower, you can go ahead, pause 3 seconds and begin your comments or questions. You can go ahead and start your comment. You can go ahead and start your comments. You can go ahead and start your comments, please. If you can hear me, you can go ahead and start your comment. Mr. Tower, you can go ahead and start your comment. Mr. Tower, if I'll come back to you. I'm not sure if you're having some trouble getting through. Mr. Wood, would you like to start your comments, please?
Thank you. Chief, I had 2 questions. Following up on what Mr. Moss was mentioning, the availability of the vaccine, there was a report that I saw, same one I think Mr. Moss was referencing, 450,000 doses that the state has received, yet only 89,326 doses had been distributed as of, I guess, yesterday. So the first question is, what's the availability? Are we having trouble getting the vaccine? I mean, it's, you know, when we've only got 20% of it being deployed and people really seem to want it, then I think we need to find out that. Do we have good availability of it? I've heard anecdotally that some hospitals have run out of Pfizer and have transitioned to Moderna and that sort of thing. And I know that's a separate pile of people that get vaccinated. Second question would be regarding the way that people are selected to receive the vaccines in this first section. We've received a number of emails from people saying, how come this department isn't receiving? For example, we've had, saying, well, what about the police department? Why haven't they've been prioritized for it? And then other people say, well, what about some of the other customer service departments within the city that actually meet with people? So is there a mandate that indicates that we will do it this way, or is this just a best practices thing? So I'll stand by for your answers.
Yes, sir. So in terms of the supply, the 3 initiatives, from my understanding, that the 3 initiatives, the the Pfizer to the hospitals, to the pharmacies to go long-term, and then direct to the local health offices are 3 independent initiatives. So our local health office orders based on the demand that they think they're going to be able to issue. So to date, what they've ordered, they've gotten. And now that we're rolling forward with these vaccinations, as we open up larger and larger venues, the anticipation is there will be more and more orders up to Richmond. I can't speak to how they're distributed out of Richmond, but as we increase volume, the increased number of orders will go up so it can be given out. In terms of who gets the vaccine, there are some dictates from federal and state levels that the first wave of the group that we're in must go to what they call Tier 1A, which is the healthcare, community healthcare providers. They're very, very particular about how these things are issued out to make sure that, I guess, groups don't cut in line, what have you. But the medical community, which would be your doctors, nurses, your dialysis centers, but that also includes our EMS and fire folks who are certified medical providers who are on the front line answering these calls. We fully recognize, in particular, what our police partners are doing every day, and let alone the rest of our city employees that interface with the public. But the directives from above, 1A is healthcare. When a large subset of the healthcare community is done, then they will open the gates to 1B, which would be essential workers. And that will include law enforcement. The way it works to get your vaccine today is when your group is invited. So for example, for EMS, we're told, hey, you are invited to participate. The employer provides a list of people who want the vaccine. That gets entered into a website that sends you an email so you can sign up to get the vaccine. So an individual today can't just call the health department and say, I want an appointment. A sponsoring agency, whether it's your physician practice or your EMS department, has to upload you. So we are working internally with the City of Virginia Beach for our essential employee groups, and very quickly, when the door opens to go to 1B, we want to be able to throw that list right into the database and get those people vaccinated. But right now, it is restricted to healthcare providers only, not public safety, but healthcare.
Mr. Wood, did you have any more questions or comments?
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Tower, you can go ahead and begin with your comment or question, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to second what Councilman Moss said. He touched on most of the issues that concern me. I would redouble the efforts to communicate. I think we have a real, based on the phone calls that I'm getting, email and phone calls, but particularly phone calls, people don't feel like they've got information, and I don't believe that we can kick it upstairs. I know that we are dependent upon the state for scheduling and perhaps the federal government directly and indirectly. But as someone said to me today, even if we don't have any information, saying that we don't have any new information today or every third day or some type of schedule where they hear from the City of Virginia Beach of what we know and what we can share about the progress of the vaccination. It is a matter of intense interest and concern to our citizens. And even though it may be difficult to not step on the state's toes or otherwise interfere with the process, I know it's delicate. I think we can fashion a message periodically that we give to the citizens to let them know how this process is going and not be dependent on news sources, but really have a way to go to the city for answers, even if the answer is we don't know any more than 2 days ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tower. I have Ms. Henley. I'm sorry, Ms. Wilson, Ms. Henley, and then Mr. Berlucci. Ms. Wilson, if you'll go ahead and pause 2 to 3 seconds and then begin your comments or questions, please.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. One is partially about what John Moss was saying about implementation of how are we going to have enough nurses and paramedics and to actually administer the shots. I mean, we're obviously the largest city in the state of Virginia, and that's a lot of personnel. It's not eating a sugar cube, it's, inoculations and getting, everybody the shot. The other thing is looking at these different phases, I would really like more definition of who's included, what population groups are included in the workforce priorities and the general population priorities of phase 1, 2, and 3. If I could get more detail on that, because it's really sketchy. It doesn't really tell you anything. So people could have an idea of where they fall in the queue with these things. And thirdly, we know that there are more vaccines that are going to be coming out. I know Johnson & Johnson has one that's on the verge. And so, hopefully there's going to be, more that's going to be available. This is just the very beginning. But if you could answer those questions for me, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
In terms of giving the vaccine, we're in really a great place. Today, we have a robust medical reserve corps that works for the health department, and it's a ton of volunteer nurses and other health disciplines. Within the EMS department, I've got over 60 folks who have completed vaccination training, and we could dig deeper than that within the city to find more actual people to give injections if it comes to that. So we feel pretty good there. The population group definitions, I will work on getting something from the health department over. It's been kind of fluid, but I agree that what we've given you is pretty vague.
Ms. Wilson, do you have any further questions or comments?
Any idea when we might get the information on the population groups, Ed?
When we're done here, I'm going to make a call to my contact at the health department and see what we can move along.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. As long as if you don't have any more questions, I'm going to move on to Ms. Henley and then Mr. Berlucci.
This is Barbara Henley. I think the point has been made by others quite well that we're not doing a very good job at this point in getting out these vaccines. It's extremely unsettling to hear that Virginia is one of the least nimble of the states that have performed so far. And to hear 249 vaccinations last week in Virginia Beach with our folks and 500 today and 500 more, we're having more cases than that every day. And at a time when we are at the height of this pandemic, and now we do have a vaccine, and to find that we're not doing very well in getting it out is very, very troubling and very, very concerning. And I guess there was a TV interview by someone on one of the stations last night that really didn't sound too good from some of the comments that we got. It sort of put off and I'm reading from the transcript we got from our folks today on this, that it said that the senior citizens would start toward the end of January and beginning of February. That's not satisfactory. I think reports last night said Northeastern North Carolina, I think maybe Dare was starting with their folks over 75 this week. We've got to do better. We simply cannot tolerate these numbers that are coming out every day when we do now have a vaccine and we have vaccines that are not being used. So whatever it takes, it's got to be a lot better than we're doing. And I certainly don't mean to be critical, but we can do better than this. And it's time to pull out all the stops to get it done in whatever it takes. And certainly, I think all of us would be in line to do everything that we can to get this message out to our constituents that if we want to get this city under control again, people have to take this vaccination, and we've got to get them, and we've got to get them out there to people so that these people who are anxious to get their vaccines, like I am, can do so. So I hope we've made that point and that we see some results. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Henley. Councilmember Berlucci, you can go ahead with your comments, please.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My question is about just looking for a little bit more clarity on the plan for the city workforce and also how that might relate to the general population as well. Because I think what I understood from Chief Brazel's comments were that the vaccines would be distributed to certain members of the city workforce concurrently with the general population based on the type of job they do. And I'm aware, of course, that some vaccines have been distributed to EMS, fire, and healthcare workers. And I'm just curious if you could provide more detail about how the vaccines would be distributed to other members of our city workforce, especially those, for example, in public utilities. I'm just using that as an example. I'm not saying that's the only job that may be at some risk for COVID as a result of the fact, my understanding about how COVID can be present in the public utilities and putting those workers at risk. So if you could provide some more detail about what that vaccination schedule may look like. And then I guess as a follow-up question to that, or related question, is there any sort of direction about what would be a best practice? In other words, is there any type of standardization for what those that vaccine schedule may look like? For example, is Norfolk and Portsmouth and Chesapeake or any other city going to have a different schedule rollout than in Virginia Beach? Are they being organized similarly or in a standard fashion, or is it up to the municipality? So I hope that makes sense, and I look forward to your answer.
Yes, sir. So I'll answer the second question first. It's within the multi-pronged approach. There's different ways in each locality happening. So hence kind of why we're here today is we kind of saw these challenges and looked at what we have internal to all of our resources, and we're putting them all on the table to help them do that. And but we're vaccinated more in terms of what via the health department in the city. We vaccinated more than some of our neighbors. When you look at the total number in the city, I think the number's around 4,000 between hospitals, nursing homes, and our health department efforts. But it is a decentralized approach by community. So we're jumping on with all the resources we have as a city to help them do this. Going back to the employees, in this tiered list of 1A, then which is healthcare, and then 1B, where you're getting into your essential workers like corrections workers, potentially teachers, grocery store employees, and then 1C, which would be other workers. Those groups, as the health department says, we are opening the door for 1B. There are some of us within city staff are prepared to immediately enroll any of our employees that meet those things. We want to help get them in. It's not necessarily head of the line, but we know when the tickets have gone on sale and we're going to be ready to make that call for those tickets as soon as we can. So that's how we're working. We're working once we better define what essential is, what that means. If that's the person who, well, I won't name an employee, but if that's that essential person, we're going to ask them to be put on the list so we can hit send as soon as they say that group is available to get the vaccine. Now, the general public public marketing would be coordinated through the health department, and obviously we'll see how we can help with that messaging as well to get them enrolled. And I think Kim also had a comment here too.
So
well,
I just wanted to,
Steve, sorry, please continue. I apologize for interrupting.
okay. So I just wanted to kind of respond to Ms. Henley's comments a little bit and let her and the rest of you all know that her comments and the process for this going out is exactly why we are here today. We saw that the health department was really struggling to get this going and get this off the ground. And by partnering with them, we've been able to get, you know, our process rolling here. And we do actually have our neighboring localities are kind of polling everybody and wanting to know, you know, how everybody's doing it. So I will tell you, we are much ahead of our neighbors in that respect. We've already spoken with city manager's office about, you know, mobilizing our resources that we could use for this in order to push this forward in a faster fashion. We did start out a little slowly. The 250 last week was really a test of the process to test the app that the health department is using. We did not want to request 1,000 vaccines and try and run 1,000 through only to have glitches with the system, because they do, once the vials are punctured, they do have to be used in about a 6-hour time frame. So we did want to do a small number to start the process. We've started, we had the 500 this morning. They will be running another one later this week. And then as we move forward, they will become more frequent because we will start seeing the folks that need their second vaccine. So the 500 was a starting point to make sure that our process was straight and that we were able to move forward with it. But really the reason we are jumping into this and the reason we're here today asking you to support our request for resources to support this is so that we can vaccinate as many Virginia Beach citizens as we can moving forward, as many as would want the vaccine, whereas some of our neighbors are struggling with that because if they are relying strictly on the health department to do these vaccines and to run these clinics, then the health department currently is struggling with keeping up with that demand. And so we've seen an opportunity as a city with our office, emergency management and EMS to really kind of jump on board with this and push it forward in our city in a much faster fashion. But, you know, that does require kind of the logistics and the resources to do that. So we do feel exactly as Ms. Henley does that, you know, we need to get this to the general public as quickly as possible. I know my parents are, you know, asking, when's our turn, you know, so the faster we can move through the priorities that the state has set, the faster we can get to the general public, and the more resources that we have to kind of throw at that effort, the quicker that's going to happen. So just wanted to kind of comment on that. And I don't know if Mr. Berlucci had another question that we kind of jumped in front of, or if he was finished with his comment.
I'm finished with my comments. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Berlucci. Councilmember Rouse, and then I'll call on Ms. Wooten and Mr. Moss. Mr. Rouse, go ahead and wait 3 seconds and begin your comments, please.
Thank you, Kim, for that. You actually answered my question on how aggressive can we be in getting our public and our staff vaccinated, and what resources do you need? It's the reason why you're here today. And I just want to make sure and ask, this is the most efficient and aggressive way we can get the available vaccine out, or is there something more that we can be doing by way of being aggressive to getting this vaccination out to our public?
I just realized you have me on camera, so I'm gonna put my face in the camera here. It is the most aggressive with what we have available today, but we are looking for the better ways and having conversations with the health department and others to see how can we expedite this process.
My second question would be the follow-up. Is there anything we need to do or we can do as a locality, as a council, as a body to make a call or push up in Richmond to get us the more vaccines so we can vaccinate, Virginia's largest city here in Virginia? Is there something that we can do from that standpoint?
I don't have an answer to that question, but if I see a way, I will definitely talk to the manager about options that we can advise for that avenue, for sure. But I don't have one right off the top of my head.
Councilmember Rouse, I'm sorry, do you have any other comments, or can I move on to the next council member?
Thank you so much. No, I'm done. Thank you, Chief Brazel.
Thank you, Mr. Rouse. Ms. Wooten, if you'll pause 3 seconds and then you can begin your comments. And after Ms. Wooten, we'll have Mr. Moss.
And thank you very much, Chief Brazel, for participating in this very important discussion, educating the body and getting out really important information to the public on the vaccination process. I just have one question for you. It's one question that I've been getting several emails on, and it's just simply the process. Is this a voluntary process? From what I understand, the vaccination process is voluntary. However, there are some who are concerned that this may become a mandatory process. So I just wonder if you could speak to that particular aspect of the voluntary process that we're using for the vaccination process.
It is completely a voluntary process. We don't expect any mandates for public employees to get the vaccine. That's not been any discussion at all, other than no, we're not mandating it at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wooten. Do you have any other comments or questions?
No, that concludes my questions on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Moss, if you'll begin your comments in about 3 seconds. Thank you.
My comments for the city manager as to how we're coordinating with the school system. That's a big part that helps keep our economy working, is having kids getting back into the classroom. And those would be a lot of those 1B, I would say, category workers. So are we coordinating with the school system? Plus the school system, every school has a school nurse. So there's the ability to do on-site inoculation at the schools themselves with a registered nurse. So I hope that they likewise are loading up their databases to populate the system, and that we are coordinating that so that even if the transmission rates don't come down like we'd like within their policy, if we can get the inoculation rate up of our teachers, we will facilitate getting our children back to school. So are we coordinating with the school system, and are we leveraging the healthcare professionals in the school system? Over.
This is Patrick. From my understanding, the school's going through the same exercise, and I think they're looped in as well through the health department with us as well.
school will set up its own inoculation sites with its healthcare professionals, or are they pooling their healthcare professionals since they're not working with kids at school with our sites? I'm just trying to understand how we're maximizing the use of our registered nurses to increase our capacity and capability to provide shots.
Of those details at this time, but as part of getting the follow-up information that I hope to get you next week, I'll see if we can get some more information as it relates to that. But I think from what I understand is that they're working on getting their workforce inoculated as well.
Do you have any other questions or comments?
No, thank you very much, Patrick.
Councilmember Henley, I see your hand is raised, and then I have Chief Brazil. Mr. Rouse, if you don't have any other comments, could you lower your virtual hand or leave it up, and then I will call you. At this time, Ms. Henley, if you have any comments, you can go ahead and pause 3 seconds and then begin.
I believe when this presentation started, you said that it was because we needed to approve the funding. What do we need to do? Because I think we certainly need to give a nod to spending the money that's necessary to get this done as quickly as possible. And do we need to take any action at this time?
This is Patrick. We don't need to take any action at this time. We were just given an overview and an outlay of what we think we may need to get to, but we're continuing to work on getting our staff inoculated. This was a to-be conversation of what may possibly happen, but we need to do some more homework and get back and get some more details to the council before we kind of consider any appropriation.
Chief Brazil, if you have any comments, you can go ahead and start those in about 3 seconds, please.
Hi, I just wanted to respond briefly to the question about the schools and the school nurses. We have incorporated the schools into our planning. We have had discussions with them regarding their school nurses and the possible use of their facilities. They are open to working with us on that, and we're still trying to coordinate with them as to the best avenue to do that partnership. So they're definitely in the discussion, and their nurses, they have identified some of their school nurses that will be used for vaccinating. To date, they are still strictly talking about their staff because the vaccines that have been approved so far are not approved for school-aged children. So we would be still looking at their staff, but we have been in discussions with the schools. So that is an ongoing discussion.
Mayor, we don't have any other speakers ready to make comments.
Okay, thank you for everybody who participated. Obviously, this is a timely and very important discussion, but I think moving forward, there are certain logistics that are out there. I guess, you know, Ed, that, you know, the fact that, you know, the freezing component of some of the vaccines and some of the other things may give us logistical challenges, but I think we have to underscore the importance of getting as many people vaccinated as quickly as human possible. So once again, I thank everybody for a robust discussion. Mr. Duhaney.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, at this time, the planning department is going to give an update on the items that are going to come before you today for your approval and consideration.
Hello, good afternoon. Both Kevin Kemp and I will be providing you with a real quick overview of the planning items that we have scheduled for both this evening and also for the January 19th City Council meeting. We have 5 applications that are scheduled for tonight. 3 are in the Kempsville district, 1 in Bayside, and 1 in the Beach district. And application number 1 is a request for a conditional rezoning for property that's along Military Highway. Specifically, this application is to conditionally rezone property that's currently zoned B2 Community Business District. Oh, excuse me, that is the wrong slide. That's not the correct slideshow. Sorry, Chris. That's the slideshow for this evening's meeting. The slideshow would be titled Planning Glimpse, I believe. There you go. Thank you. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. And we can move to slide number 3. Perfect, thank you. So this is item number 1, which is a request to conditionally rezone property along Military Highway. And it's a request to rezone property that's zoned B2 Community Business District to conditional A24 apartment district in order to redevelop the site with up to 220 apartment units. The redevelopment of the site does include removal of an existing storage area as well as all existing buildings which are currently occupied by a general contractor, and then the construction of 5 apartment buildings and 1 clubhouse, associated parking, stormwater management where none currently exists, and then also a right turn lane into the property. The 4-story buildings are located closest to Military Highway, while the 1- and 3-story buildings are proposed closest to the existing neighborhood to the west. While the average daily trips will increase above the current uses that occupy the site, the number of trips associated with the proposal is potentially far less than other uses that could be developed as a matter of right under that B2 community business zoning. The existing cell tower on the property will remain, and the layout does reflect this. And there is no known opposition to this rezoning request, and the Planning Commission does recommend approval, and this request was on their consent agenda. The next 2 applications are for the home-based wildlife rehabilitation facilities, both of which were on the Planning Commission's consent agenda. Item 2 is a request within the Larksdown neighborhood in the Kempsville district, and the applicant was working as a wildlife rehabilitator at her previous address without incident and with a conditional use permit. As she has recently moved to this site, she is now requesting a conditional use permit specifically for this address. The applicant will provide emergency care for injured infant squirrels, possums, and raccoons, and the animals will be kept in a 150 square foot structure in the backyard that is entirely enclosed with a 6-foot tall solid privacy fence. And consistent with the requirements of the zoning ordinance, no animals will be released on site, and there is no known opposition. Item 3 is a similar request, and this site is located in the Bellamy Manor neighborhood, also in the Kempsville district. And this applicant proposes to provide emergency care for injured infant squirrels, possums, birds, and waterfowl. Animals will be kept in the garage and then transferred to a 160 square foot structure that is in the backyard that is entirely enclosed by a 6-foot tall solid privacy fence. And there is no known opposition to this application. Item 4 is an application to modify an existing restaurant that's located in the Chicks Beach neighborhood on property that is actually zoned for residential uses rather than for the commercial use, such as a restaurant. So based on this, approval by the City Council is required for any improvements to the building. Specifically, the request is to rebuild an outdoor covered dining area and also add a small deck. The restaurant has been at this location since at least the 1960s, and city records indicate that the structure was constructed sometime in the 1930s. Prior to the Planning Commission public hearing, staff did receive 2 letters of concern However, immediately prior to the Planning Commission public hearing, the applicant and those property owners were able to meet and resolve any of their concerns. So there were no speakers at the public hearing, and the Planning Commission voted 7-2 to recommend approval to the City Council. Agenda item 5 is a request for modifications for religious use that's located along Virginia Beach Boulevard, and it's known as the Open Door Chapel. I'm sorry, we are on slide number 11, Chris. Thank you, and apologies for that technical difficulty. So this is a request for modification of conditions for religious use along Virginia Beach Boulevard, known as the Open Door Chapel. And specifically, this is a request to remove approximately half of an acre of the property from the conditional use permit in order to combine it with a future redevelopment of the site to the north. The area is proposed to become part of a parking lot for a new by right retail development. The church will remain on the site, and there will be no impacts to the minimum lot area requirements or to the parking requirements. There is no known opposition, and this was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission on their consent agenda. There are 11 planning items scheduled for the January 19th City Council agenda. Items 1 and 2 include a rezoning and a conditional use permit, and then item 3 is a rezoning, while the remaining 8 applications are short-term rentals. So I'll give you a quick overview of the first 3 applications, and then Kevin Kemp will jump in and discuss the remaining 8 applications. So moving on to slide number 15. Items 1 and 2 for the 19th include a rezoning request from R5D Residential District to and A12 Apartment District to conditional I1 Light Industrial District, as well as a conditional use permit for automobile repair. This property at the intersection of London Bridge Road and Potters Road was acquired by the city both through a right-of-way improvement project as well as the Accident Potential Zone 1 land acquisition program, which is designed to prevent further development of land surrounding NAS Oceana with uses that are deemed incompatible with naval flight operations. The proposal on city-owned property is for a 15,000 square foot building for an auto repair collision center. The operation, the building, and the site layout are designed with the residential neighborhood across the street in mind. This includes a 1-story attractive building with residential elements, plant material beyond the minimum, garage doors that are only located on the southern facade, all repairs to be done inside the building, and a limitation on the hours of operation. The applicant did hold a virtual outreach meeting, and approximately 8 to 10 of the surrounding residents did attend that meeting. There were 2 speakers in opposition at the Planning Commission public hearing, and they relayed concerns to the Planning Commission about negative impacts that the proposed use might have to the neighborhood and concerns about noise, and that the request is really too intense of a use near residential properties. The Planning Commission did vote 7-2 to recommend approval to the City Council. Agenda item 3 is a request to conditionally rezone approximately 14.5 acres for the redevelopment of the existing Windsong apartment complex that's located along Pleasure House Road. The proposal includes the renovation of 13 two-story apartment buildings that were built in the 1970s and the redevelopment of a portion of the site with one new three-story apartment building and two new four-story apartment buildings. There will be 411 units for a net increase of 139 units. Improvements on the site include a recreation area with a pool with resort-style amenities, plantings both interior to the site and along property lines, 695 parking spaces, as indicated in their land use plan. Without the rezoning to the PDH zoning, they would have a requirement of 732 parking spaces, and the installation of stormwater management where there currently is none. Traffic engineering staff concur with the findings of the submitted traffic analysis that does indicate traffic is not expected to adversely impact adjacent roadways and intersections. The applicant met with the Bayfront Advisory Commission twice, and according to the applicant, had multiple meetings with the community. There were 6 speakers in support and 10 speakers in opposition who did relate concerns with the proposed increase in the number of units, problems associated with stormwater, potential issues with traffic, and concern that the rise in rents due to the redevelopment of the property may result in some homelessness. Despite this, the Planning Commission does recommend approval 7-1 to the City Council. And I can pass it to Kevin now.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. As mentioned, City Council will actually hear 7 items for our short-term rentals on this agenda. One of the items, item 9 on this slide, has been officially withdrawn. 6 of the 7 applications are recommended for approval by both staff and Planning Commission. 5 of them were considered on the consent agenda. The other application was recommended for approval by staff, but denial by Planning Commission. All items were heard by Planning Commission on December 9th. And now I will briefly go over those items. Item number 4 is a short-term rental request for one unit, a 16-unit Seacrest condo complex. The property is located in the OR district, which is included in one of the proposed overlays moving forward. Next slide, please. The occupancy of the 1-bedroom unit is limited to 2 persons. All required parking is on site in a designated parking space. The property is located within the RPPP and therefore is not eligible for any guest spaces or guest passes while the unit is being used as an STR. Next slide. The property is currently not in use as a short-term rental. The applicants are awaiting approval before they register with the Commissioner of Revenue and advertise the property. There have been no zoning complaints and staff has received no opposition. As such, both staff and Planning Commission recommend approval of this item. Item number 5 is for a semi-detached dwelling unit located on a 5,000 square foot lot in the North End neighborhood. The property is located almost adjacent to the 64th Street entrance to First Landing State Park and is included in one of the proposed overlays being considered. The occupancy of the 3-bedroom home will be limited to 6 persons. All required parking is located on site in a compacted gravel driveway. Although gravel is typically not a approved material, this home was built in 1976 prior to when that was a requirement, and therefore this parking solution was approved. The property is currently advertised, however, for a minimum stay of 30 days or more, therefore not requiring a CUP. The last documented stay was 1 to 2 months ago. The property is registered with the Commissioner of Revenue. There have been no complaints received by the Zoning Division. There were 4 letters of opposition. The concerns were increased traffic, on-street parking, and safety of the residents, particularly children, with the changing transient occupancy, and that the character of the neighborhood would change. Regardless, staff and Planning Commission recommended approval of the item. Item number 6 is a request for a single-family home located on an oceanfront lot in the R7.5 district. The property is not located in the North End overlay, which is being considered for a short-term rental overlay, but is located in an area between the North End and the OR, which there have been discussions that an overlay may exist in the future. The occupancy of the 5-bedroom home will be limited to 10 persons, and all required parking is accommodated on site within the existing driveway. The property is currently not in use as a short-term rental. The applicants are awaiting approval to register and advertise. There have been no zoning complaints, and staff has received no opposition to the application. As such, both staff and Planning Commission recommended approval of the item, and it was considered on the consent agenda. Item number 7 is for a townhouse located in the Pinewood Cove Townhome development. The property is on the west side of the Shadow Lawn neighborhood in the zone A24. It is not located in one of the proposed overlays. The occupancy of the 3-bedroom townhome would be limited to 6 persons. All required parking is accommodated on site in front of the home. One of the spaces encroaches slightly into the right-of-way. However, since it did not block pedestrian or vehicular traffic, staff did recommend approval of this parking plan. The property is currently advertised and registered. However, it has not been rented since the conditional use permit has been applied for. There have been no zoning complaints received. One speaker was in opposition at the Planning Commission hearing. His concerns were increased traffic, commercialization of the neighborhood, parking, noise and partying, and one incident of nudity associated with the outdoor shower. Staff recommended approval of the item, and Planning Commission recommended denial of this item. Item number 8 is for a townhome located on the same street as the last application within the Pinehome Cove Townhouse development. As mentioned, this is on the western side of Shadow Lawn neighborhood and is not located in one of the proposed overlays. The occupancy of this 3-bedroom townhome will be limited to 3 persons. All required parking will be accommodated in a driveway in front of the home. The parking area is 25 feet wide by 31 foot deep, and that is from the sidewalk to the edge of the street. 2 spaces will be located side to side with a 3rd parallel behind the other 2. This is a parking situation that is common in this neighborhood, and it does not block vehicular or pedestrian traffic. Therefore, it was approved. The property is currently registered but not advertised. The last day was prior to filling out this application. There have been no zoning complaints received. There was one speaker in opposition present. His concerns were increased traffic and the parking solution that was presented. However, both staff and Planning Commission recommended approval of this item. As I mentioned earlier, item number 9 has requested withdrawal or has withdrawn from consideration and will not be heard. Item number 10 is for a townhouse located in the same development as the previous 2 townhomes I reviewed. So as I mentioned previously, it is not included in one of the proposed overlays. The occupancy of this 2-bedroom townhome will be limited to 4 persons, and all required parking will be accommodated in the driveway in front of the home. The property is currently registered and advertised and has been rented since applying for the conditional use permit. There have been no zoning complaints received. 1 letter of opposition was received. The concerns were noise, overcrowding, property damage from overflow parking, and fears of the transient nature of the short-term rental use. Both staff and Planning Commission recommended approval of this item, and it was considered on the consent agenda. The last item, item number 11, is for 1 unit of a duplex located in the Bayside District, just west of the Lesner Bridge in the Ocean Park neighborhood. The property is located in the Shore Drive overlay, but is not in one of the overlays being considered for short-term rentals. The occupancy of this 3-bedroom unit will be limited to 6 persons. The required off-street parking will be accommodated with 1 space in the garage and 2 in the driveway in front of the unit. Although one of the spaces is located predominantly in the right-of-way, it does not block vehicular plan was approved. The property is currently registered and advertised. The property has continued to have been rented despite not being approved for a conditional use permit. There have been no zoning complaints received. One letter of opposition was received, with the concerns being noise and fears over the transient nature of the short-term rental use. Both staff and Planning Commission recommended approval of this item, and it was considered on the consent agenda. And those are the short-term rental applications being considered. Thank you, members of council.
Okay. Okay, at this point, okay, we finished.
Mayor, I'm sorry, we have Councilmember Moss who would like to make a comment or ask a question.
Go right ahead.
Councilmember Moss, if you'll just wait 3 seconds and begin your comment, and then we'll go to Mr. Tower after Mr. Moss.
I just want to make sure that we're going to get a full verbatim on the Windsong application, so we'll have a chance to read the both the supporters and the opposition to that application. Thank you.
Ms. Smith, if you could just wait 1 second, we'll have you start over on your comments. We couldn't hear you. Just pause 3 seconds and then begin speaking, please.
My apologies. Yes, we absolutely will provide you with a verbatim of not only that one, but we are now providing you verbatims of all of the Planning Commission applications that are heard. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Mr. Tower, if you will just pause 3 seconds and then you can begin speaking. You'll pause 3 seconds and then you can begin speaking. Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Tower, go ahead and start your comments.
Sorry, having technical issues here. I'm addressing my remarks to Kevin. Kevin, you referred to a 3-bedroom unit. I couldn't follow it well, but it was a 3-bedroom unit. You said it would be limited to 3 persons. I assume you meant 6 persons, right? I'm trying. That was discussed. Can you hear me? You said in your presentation that that unit would be limited to 3 persons. Did you mean 6 persons? Second question, if I can follow up, is are we going to get copies of this sneak peek presentation that you just made?
Pardon you.
We're going to get copies.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kemp, can you hold on 1 second? Mr. Tower, I didn't hear your question.
Are we going to get copies of the deck you just showed?
Mr. Tower, so Mr. Towers, the planning items are going to be in the agenda for today, and then the next planning items will be in the next agenda. So half the presentation you should have in your agenda. And then next week, you'll have the following planning items. Mr. Kemp, do you have anything to add? Pause 3 seconds. to add to that? Mr. Kemp, you can start your comments now, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I did. I had misspoke with 3 persons. It is 6 persons. In regards to the copies, I was not able to hear his follow-up, Mr. Towers' follow-up question.
Mr. Tower, go ahead and ask your question again, please.
I'm having trouble hearing as well, but that's all right. You can proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. We don't have anybody else who has their virtual hand raised at this time.
Okay, and, thank our wonderful planning staff for their presentation. Okay, at this point, if we can move forward and open the floor for council discussion. So the floor is open. Okay, there's an indication nobody is hands up for council discussion. Okay. Councilmember
Moss, I have your hand, and then Mr. Tower, if you want to make comments, I see that your hand is raised. Okay, thank you. Mr. Moss, go ahead and start your comments, please.
Mr. Mayor. One is I hope that downstream that the city manager will be able to provide us his assessment as we come out of the post-COVID environment, how much of our workforce we want to remain to do its job on a remote basis. I think the extent that that's worked well and where it's worked well and does work, I hope we would be able to continue that flexibility. But I just would like to get an impact on that. I think that would be important. And one comment I didn't make during the COVID thing that I'd like to get my nickel back. I hope we are coordinating with the military to the extent that they can share so that we know how much of our 450,000 plus residents, both military and civilian, are working and are being inoculated via the Department of Defense so we can get a better handle on just what our total coverage is from everybody's efforts. And that was one that was not mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, City Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. That's it. Okay, now council liaison reports. Anyone? Okay, no council. And how about council comments? Nobody? Okay, thank you all. Okay, Mr. Vice Mayor, if we can do the agenda review.
So members of council, we have speakers only on item K1, and everything else under ordinances and resolutions and planning is just the applicants. So I don't know what the council prefers. If y'all would just raise your hand and indicate if you obviously item K1 would be heard, but the rest of the items could be put on consent if it's the will of the council.
Councilmember Moss?
Councilman Wood, I just plan on voting no on L3, and I'll provide my explanation after the vote.
Okay, is there anyone else? With the exception of item K1, the suggestion from Vice Mayor is to put everything else on consent. Any problem at all? Okay, great. All right, at this point, why don't we go ahead and recess, and we'll resume at 6 o'clock, with our formal agenda, unless anybody else has any other questions or concerns. Okay, we are recessed until 6 o'clock.